Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Parent. I am the CEO of Court Square Group. We are a managed service firm managing IT infrastructure for life science companies. This is Driving the Business of Science podcast. Why do I have this podcast? One is because I think that everybody thinks about the pharmaceutical or the life science vertical in a certain way. And I think there's a lot of business that happens that people don't think about. It's not just all the scientists in the vertical. There's a lot of things that happen. And I like to find a lot of people that are in this industry that are doing things that I think are very interesting and bring them on the podcast to talk about what they do to help drive the business of science. Let me talk about Court Square first. Today we actually have a person on, Jeremy Bromberg, who's an operational advisor who actually has worked with Court Square. So I thought he was a great person to bring on our podcast today. But at the same time, he's got a lot of background in the pharmaceutical industry, and I wanted to hear some of his background, both in the operations side of the house as well as in the pharmaceutical industry. So let's talk a little bit about Court Square first, just so you know who we're coming from and what our background is. We are a managed service firm. We manage IT infrastructure for life science companies. We actually have what's called ARC. It's an audit ready compliant cloud that can host any application all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. At the same time, we have another application called RegDocs 365, which is a content repository that can host any type of clinical or regulatory content. It's really a platform for dealing with clinical and regulatory content. Um, and we've actually created an EDM reference model, the ETMF, as well as what we call Life Science Launchpad for startup companies. So we've got a number of tools that we use, and we've actually incorporated a lot of AI tools into our environment. With that being said, let's talk with our guest for today, Jeremy Bromberg. Jeremy, can you give us a little bit of a background on you, yourself, and your background in the life science world?
Certainly. Well, first of all, Keith, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate that. I am a business operator first and foremost, helping businesses grow, scale, improve revenue, profit, and employee retention. My experience has spanned a number of industries, was in technology first, then went on to pharmaceutical and biotech market research for a lot of years. From there, went to some independent chief operating officer consulting, and then more recently back in consulting, but the two consulting experiences sandwiched time in the cannabis industry. Uh, for life sciences, I was with a company called Idetics doing pharmaceutical market research. Small firm based in Boston that when I joined was 6 people, we got to 50 people over a period of years, and we worked exclusively with pharmaceutical and biotech clients. So it was really an opportunity to get in early and help build the firm up and see it get to great success.
Fantastic. So I got introduced to Jeremy by a friend of ours, and you anybody that's watched or listened to a number of our podcasts have heard me talk about Shelley Amster. Shelley introduced me to Jeremy. We had a great lunch, and we were able to talk a little bit about his background, particularly at a company called Safety Partners. And I knew of Safety Partners from our experience here in the life science industry. So talk to me a little bit, Jeremy, about what you did with Safety Partners and how your operational background helped them out.
Certainly. Yes, Safety Partners was one of my clients for a number of years. And what had happened was the founder and owner, Denise Aronson, had done a great job building the company up. I mean, it had been growing, it got to a certain number of people, a lot of clients, was well known within the biotech industry here in Massachusetts. But yet Denise was finding that she was still working ungodly number of hours per day, and it didn't feel like her firm was moving ahead. They were solid. They were still being hired, still being used. That wasn't a risk, but the financially it was challenging. And so she was directed to me when she was talking to people about the challenges she was facing. And we started talking, and she decided that she liked what she heard. So went in and kind of did a dive into what was going on via looking at data, talking to people, really understanding what was going on, and saw a couple opportunities that I felt could make a difference. One was looking and seeing that pricing needed to change. I was looking at it going, your pricing does not really give you enough in the way of a margin. She expressed the concern that most entrepreneurs would express is, when I raise my prices, am I going to lose my customers? And based on my experience, my answer was maybe, but you're going to end up making more money. Maybe a few will complain about it, but frankly, you're below market, so I don't think they have a whole lot to complain about. Well, when she raised the prices, in fact, no one left. So she was all of a sudden making more money and seeing more margin and giving her some room to breathe. The other was looking at how the organization was structured. And it had been, to call it flat would be, it's flat to the absolute. But my view was it needed to be broken up a bit more so that you really focused areas on functional activities, so that you had consultants who would be delivering the service, but you also had people behind them who were training them, educating them, and making sure that the quality that was delivered by each of the consultants was consistent and up to safety partner standards. So, frankly, with these two pieces in place and people put in charge of those functions, started to see the trajectory change for safety partners. It kept growing, and we kept sort of tweaking things as we moved forward, added some executives to the mix, and the company then went forward very strong and up until its exit last year, or earlier this year, excuse me.
Fantastic. So, you deal a lot with professional services firms, and with your experience with safety partners, how did your experience with the pharmaceutical marketing background help you, and particularly with any kind of companies in the life sciences vertical?
I mean, the important thing, I mean, as all of you in life sciences know, there's no shortage of regulations, there's no shortage of laws, there's no shortage of things you have to do for safety reasons, for all sorts of good reasons. And that becomes a challenge to people because they go, well, now we have to, and now we have to. Well, the answer is, yeah, you do, and that is simply a constraint. So the fact is, where do you want to go? What does the firm stand for? What are you trying to achieve financially, practically, qualitatively? What are you trying to get to? So it's basically, it becomes with life sciences, as in more or less any business, to me, it becomes like a math word problem. What are you trying to solve for? What information do you have? And how can you put those two together to create a solution? So for life sciences industry, where they have to have the regulations, where they have to document what's going on, they have to have careful consideration of all those factors. Yes, you need someone in the organization who's going to keep you honest on that, who understands it, but also you figure out how do you work with it as opposed to fighting it the whole way. How can you leverage it to get where you want to go? And it's a challenge, but it's often accomplished, achievable.
It's interesting, in my own experience within the life science vertical, we are an IT services firm, so we deal with a lot of service capabilities within the life science vertical. One of the things that I find particularly interesting in the life science vertical is that there are our own language, and it's a certain way of doing things and how you do stuff. And there's a set of processes, procedures you have to follow from a compliance perspective. And while there are many good IT firms out there, many of them just don't understand the fact that if you don't follow the processes and you don't document what you need to do and put things in order, many times you're going to run afoul of the regulators or the auditors when they come in to look at you. And I think that's part of the issue that is irksome to many companies that are out there, and it's too much for them, and they just don't. It's too much. They can make too much more money. They can make more money outside of this industry than they can in the industry. So that's something we have to deal with on a very regular basis. And it's just one of those areas that you deal with and what you have to deal with. How, in your experience dealing with services firms, do you convince a firm that maybe they're not in the life science vertical and they want to get into it to either do it the right way or not do it at all? Do you ever have to run into that kind of situation?
Yes, but I want to actually come back to something you were saying just before. To me, the value, when I look at from where I stand, the value of a group like Court Square is in what you have to offer, and it's things that if when firms, I've been in small companies where we've had an IT person on staff. Well, when you're very small, that might be helpful if you're not doing too much. Not the case of life sciences. I think it's going to be a different story. But with the case of IT, there's so many different technologies, applications, functions, way it can be used, that you need a staff to handle all the variations. So I tended to hire groups like Court Square in the past because they had the range of capabilities built into their company. They understand how all the pieces fed into IT, and therefore, instead of me hiring lots of people, I could have a single point of contact that would be able to address the range of concerns that I have in the world of IT. To do that, in the case of a life sciences company, I would absolutely tell them to look at a Court Square or well, I would tell them to look at Courtsquare, but of that nature, because there is the regulations, and Courtsquare needs to, in delivering their service, they need to make sure their service is aligned with what the industry needs. And so, to have the compliant in the cloud, the ARC system that you mentioned, those things, yes, that's a difference maker, because then you already speak the language. When you come into place the tools, I could be sitting there saying, well, we just need, we're just going to log everything onto a Google Sheet. And you're like, yeah, but you know what happens when you've got a file with the FDA? You've got to then take all that and translate it, or you've got to have it in a certain form. We're here to help you get there now. So to look at a company, if someone wanted to go into life sciences, I'd say then you've got to be talking to life science specialists, because there's going to be a whole raft of regulations, laws, considerations that must be followed. And you need to have that knowledge both in-house and with anybody that you work with. So if you want to go into an area that you have not previously been in a particular industry or a particular vertical, then you need to align yourself with people who have been there and who know the language and what the expectations and requirements are.
It's interesting you say that, Jeremy, because I've dealt with a number of companies that have thought that they could get into the life science vertical and do more work in the life science vertical. And what happens is, until they get that first audit and they get that first big pharma company that really blasts them. If you're dealing with the small companies, a lot of times they'll bring in a third-party consultant, or they'll try to do it themselves, and they may be somewhat lenient on what they're trying to do because they really want to work with you. But the reality is, the bigger the company that you're dealing with, the more that you're going to be really looked at as an extension of their service. And at that point, they want you to be doing things exactly the way they would be doing it, or comparable to the way they're going to do it. And if you don't, they're not going to use you. And that's just a given in this industry. It just happens that way. And more often than not, they'll walk away. They'll just say, nope, we'll have to do it ourselves, or we'll have to find somebody else to do it. So from that perspective, you have to figure out, how do you do that, and how do you put those things in place? So I think we learn more. I think not only do we have to follow the regs and watch the regs ourselves, but every single time we get audited, that's a new learning experience for us, because every auditor comes in with a different perspective on something, or a different way of looking. It's very subjective sometimes when it comes up to who's looking at what and how they're dealing with it, what their background is, and what they want to do to ding you. Because realistically, every auditor I've ever run into, they've got to prove their worth by finding something so that you can fix it, and that's kind of what happens. So and you just get used to that, and that's I kind of tell my own people. I said we shouldn't be afraid of CAPAs or things. CAPA is a corrective action plan, because if somebody finds something, then it's good to fix it, and it's good to show that we've done our due diligence of looking at what we did and how can we fix it and what can we do to make it right. Nobody expects everybody to be perfect in this industry, but the reality is you've got to be willing to do the things to change and to fix it, to document it better, or to make sure you're following your own procedures. Because realistically, one of the rules that we follow is that you say what you're going to do and you do what you say you're going to do. And part of that is you have to document it. And most people just don't see it that way. They're too busy fighting a fire, fixing something. They want to make sure the machines are up and running, and that's all well and good. But if it has any potential to affect data integrity or what happens with those systems, that's part of the problem. Let's talk a little bit more about your background and your operational background that can help a company in the life science vertical to do a better job for their clients. How would you work with a company, particularly when they're looking at maybe it's not just safety partners, maybe it's somebody else that you were working with, that even us, when you came in and you started working with me and looked at some of what's there. How do you look at where you are today versus where you want to be? And I think that can probably extend to any professional services firm for the most part. Wouldn't you say, Jeremy?
Yes. I mean, to me, going in, and even when I'm first trying to approach a company, I will ask the owner, where are you trying to go? What do you want to achieve? What would have you, proudly strutting around saying, look at what we've accomplished. Look at what our firm has done. And that's the vision. You want to be able to do that. You want to be able to make good money and be able to politely, hopefully, brag about it. And so my view is, okay, how do we get you to the position where you can do that? Well, then the question becomes, where are you now? What's the difference between where you want to be and the current reality? Then what can we leverage? What do we have that already is going to, first of all, where are we already meeting the mark? Where are we missing the mark? What stands between where we are and where we want to be? And what does it take to bridge that gap? Now, to me, even one of the things you were talking about earlier, I look at it and go, the key for a company like Court Square is when your client hires you and says, this is what we want to do, part of what you have to do is translate what they're saying into what does it actually look like when it's done correctly in a compliant and documented way. That's, because for life sciences, every step is a variable that needs to be recorded. So you need to look at it in that regard. With other companies, you're just going, look, you don't necessarily have the same set of restrictions, but you have restrictions. You have things you need to do, either because of the people you have or the regulations around the industry, or simply what does it take to be successful. And so it's true in any firm. What do you have? What do you need? And look at the people you have. Are you using them correctly? Are you playing to their strengths? Do you have someone who's really strong at words focused on numbers? That's not a good idea. Do you really align employee skills and interests with company needs? Do you have, Jim Collins would describe it as the right people in the right seats on the bus? How well are you set up to grow, to scale, and to really get the best from each person there? That's a question that's common across really any business. What are you doing? Where are you trying to get to, and what do you need to do to get there?
One of my biases, Jeremy, has always been, and I look at it as, having been in this industry for 31 plus years, I look and say, if I hire somebody that already has a life science background, that's one less thing that I have to teach them. Is that a good way to look at things, or is it more important that they have the skills that I'm hiring them for and I can teach them life science? What's your take on that?
Well, as a general rule, I begin with the belief of I'll hire someone who knows how to work, and then I can teach them what they need to know from our point of view. I don't, I can't teach someone how to work. I can't teach someone how to show up, how to, collaborate, do those sorts of things. But I can teach them the specifics of what it is we do. It depends on the job. I mean, certainly if you're hiring someone for a technical position, then the technical part matters. I argue in many cases, and I would maybe make the distinction when you're talking about scientists or engineers, but in many cases, if an interview process is, by analogy, an hour long, I would argue it's about 10 minutes on technical and 50 minutes on fit, because a key part of any company's success is how well the team plays together. But it can be easier to determine, does this person have the technical chops? However, in a field like yours, Keith, where technical skill is paramount, then you're going to spend a whole lot more time making sure they really can answer the questions and they're at least in a position to learn what it is you need to teach them. For someone in operations, they need to be able to have an appreciation of what goes on. I mean, part of my own strength is the ability to translate from technical to non-technical people. And it's kind of funny in my ability to do that because I'm not technical. I point out I'm the son of two mathematicians, and my eyes don't glaze over when people start talking technical at me. But what I say to the technical folks is, I probably understand 10% of your words, but 90% of your ideas. And as such, I'm then able to make connections. When someone in marketing is talking about something, and I go, that doesn't sound like what the engineer or the scientist was saying. You guys need to talk to each other. And they end up looking and going, yeah, we do. So it's having someone who, A, can bridge that, not necessarily because I can't tell the technical people what to do. I don't know what they know. But I can tell them, here's what we're trying to achieve. How does this fit in that? And let me hear how you answer it. So it is important that you have, in some places, the technical skill is everything. But then you also have to decide, is that a technical person who is going to be dealing with other people? Or are they behind the scenes, interacting mainly with their computer? Then becomes, how do they interact with their colleagues? But other people, it becomes, how are you going to interact with clients? And that's going to become almost as important as a technical skill. Because if they're unpleasant, it doesn't matter how smart they are.
I'd like to hear more a little bit about that pharmaceutical marketing background that you come to the table with, and how has that influenced what you do today in the life science world?
A lot. I joined that company. I was employee number six, and so there was. And first of all, I was joining an industry I had no background in. Never mind pharma and biotech. Even market research was new to me, and sure, I'd heard of Nielsen ratings or J.D. Power and Associates, but I never really thought about market research and what went into it. And then learning as you get into it, okay, well, there are questions you can ask, there are questions you can't ask. There's reporting you have to be able to do. If you're doing research and you hear about adverse events, you have to be able to report that back to the proper authorities. I mean, there becomes it over time. It became more and more embedded with the requirements of life sciences. At first, it started out just go and conduct research and be smart about it. But then it became no, you actually need to tie in better to life sciences and the regulations and the requirements. And so being aware of those, understanding that, having to go through training courses on it to become more familiar and able to recognize when you're hearing something, that became a big impact to me because it became, no, you don't just go and do the work. You have to, there's more to it, and you have to make sure you're taking all the different considerations into effect, and those include the technical aspects of the industry. So, given in contrast to my roles in technology prior, this was really a much more of a function of seeing, look, there are a lot of requirements that need to be met, and even if you're just talking to people about it, you need to understand many of those requirements and be able to address them.
Excellent. So as we're getting on time here, because we want to try to keep it at a reasonable time for people that are listening to the podcast, what are some of your last thoughts around what you can do to help companies and what companies should look for in themselves when they're looking at the life science vertical?
First, I'm going to just in terms of I'm going to start professional services and then go into life sciences. The professional services part, I think one of the biggest challenges is really ultimately developing the division of labor. Um, it's you when you're in professional services, there are people who end up with the charter to both sell and do, and they don't actually go that well together because they both take a lot of time. And sales is not something you can just turn on and turn off. You have to always be doing sales. And so to expect someone to be selling while they're doing the work, maybe also writing proposals, doing all that, you're now drawing down their energy and their focus. And certainly in an area like life sciences, where you have even the more considerations, where you're really talking about technical issues and what they need to solve, both in terms of the science itself, as well as in compliance to regulations and requirements around developing the science. It becomes very important that you understand that you have people who really are going to work with that and can bring the rules and regulations to the team, who is then can be open to understanding that that's how they have to, when they're doing their cut of the work, they have to take those considerations into effect. So you need people who make a point of understanding the technical side and what's required, the laws, the regs, etc. You need people who are focused on client management and execution. You need people who are focused on logistics. You need people who are focused on sales. And frankly, you need someone who manages it all. And I've made the comment to many entrepreneurs over the years that there are three things that are common to all businesses, and they are selling, doing, and managing. And if someone has to do two, they're not going to do either of them as well as they could. And if they have to do all three, they're not going to manage. And yet managing is critical to make sure that employees stay focused on the right path and doing the right work the right way. It's not enough to say that smart people will do the right thing, because smart kids need parents too. So you really want to focus on, look, what is the best way to do the work? What division of labor makes sense? How do we comply, literally and figuratively, with the characteristics of our given industry? What do we have to comply with? What will our clients appreciate if we comply with? How do we speak to them that they know we're really thinking of their interests, their vision, their goals, but bringing the tools and the systems that they need to do so effectively and efficiently?
Well, that's fantastic, Jeremy. And I want to thank everybody that's listening to our podcast today and take those words of wisdom from Jeremy, because actually, I've used a lot of those same words with Jeremy, and he's helped me over the last couple of years to look at some of that and put that into practice. So, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure having you on our podcast
Likewise.
today.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody that's listening today and wish you Merry Christmas, Happy New Year as we get into the new year. Hopefully 2026 will be a great year for everyone. Thank you all for listening. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Keith.